We heard a little bit from Jason Adams about the hope for this work, the future of this work, and now we've got our tribal leaders coming up to really give us the supercharged message of where we need to take this. We know that tribes and tribal leaders have the biggest roles and responsibilities in this work, and they will really make it happen. So we've got Jackie from the National Congress of American Indians, who has recognized that we've got to plan to act. And what we're really looking for is to figure out the next plan. We've had the good 2 years coming in through the coalition work, the national coalition work. So what do we do next? And we want to remove any obstacle or impediment that we might have to homeownership. I don't like to use the word barriers because barriers suggest something impenetrable. I instead like to look at it's an impediment, it's a challenge, and we certainly can figure out how to overcome those impediments. So please join me in welcoming our last panel of the day, NCAI's Executive Director Jackie Pata, her esteemed panel, Joe Garcia, he's the head councilman at Okewinge, and Sammy Jo Diffentorum. I'm so sorry, Sammy Jo. I know her as Sammy Jo. She's the executive director of the Siletz Housing Authority, and she's a former chair of the National American Indian Housing Council. I also want to say thank you, Jackie, very personally and sincerely for your partnership in this important work.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you all for letting us be the last panel of the day when you're tired, and everybody's looking forward for the end of the day. But the conversations today have been, as you all have experienced today, has been really educational and very exciting. I kind of feel like this panel, we have a bit of a burden. One of them is, I've heard about so much of the tribal leader responsibility today, and how do we really call the tribal leaders to action? And now we're, as representing tribal leadership, feeling like we have to be accountable to these conversations at the end of the day. So I want to thank our panel for being here with us today. Sammy Jo, many of you may not know, but one of the roles that she carried, in addition to being the chairwoman for the National American Housing Council, was that put her in the place of being the chair of our housing committee at NCAI. And so she had to work directly with tribal leaders during her term in sharing the housing policy messages and encouraging them. So she is not only working for her own tribe, is very experienced with having this dialogue with tribal leaders. So I'm going to ask our panelists, they've all were lucky enough to get a little advanced peek at the homeownership handbook, so we were able to take a look at that. And so part of the question, one of the questions I want to ask you is, given the things that you've heard these last 2 days and the handbook, as a working with tribal leadership, what is your vision for that future use, and how do you think that will make a difference? What can you do to help make that a difference in the work that you're doing? So you want to go ahead, Sammy Jo?
I will start. Thank you. Again, my name's Sammy Jo Diffentorum. She got it right. Yay! People just call me Sammy Jo because Diffentorum is not an easy word. That was my husband's name, and his family came from the Philippine Islands. And so people always want to make it like Italian or Greek, and it's not any of those things. So Sammy Jo's perfectly fine. So I'm a member of the Shasta tribe from Northern California, and I'm the housing director for the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians in the state of Oregon. I've worked professionally in the field of Indian housing for 24 years, which is a really long time to be a housing director in Indian country, is it not? It is. So I think that one of the things that there was a lot of information the last 2 days, really highly technical information. I was kind of shaking my head yesterday. Do all housing directors really know and understand all these things? The BIA work, the lending piece of it, it's quite a lot to take in. So I'm really impressed with the quality of presenters and panelists this week and the level of expertise that's here. I think one of the things that's true is not every tribe is the same. In fact, every tribe is a little bit different. And I'm going to use my personal experience right now to kind of illustrate that. So the tribe that I work for, it's about maybe 5,300 tribal members. And in Oregon, that's substantial. Nationally, that's probably about a mid-sized tribe, realistically. Small tribes, we call, are the tribes from California that have like 3 or 4. Or my tribe has 300, maybe 350 tribal members. And that's not even the smallest of tribes. So our strategies are different. Our tribal leadership they're all different. Every tribal council has their own vision on how they want to meet the needs of their tribal members, particularly in the housing realm. When I started in Indian housing in 1994, one of the ladies that I consider a mentor, for some of you that are housing wonks, Judith Morosco. She was I worked under her as a deputy director at Karuk. And she told me, Sammy Joe, Indian country's really behind the curve with financing. I'm like, what? She said, yeah, this is how people pay for college educations. This is how people pay for starting up small businesses. This is how people who don't have retirement accounts pay for their retirement. It's equity in their homes. I'm like, wow, I never knew that. I didn't have any idea. My mother lives in the same home that my grandfather lived in. And so the one thing that I knew growing up, we didn't talk about money. If she had a retirement account, it was not something I heard about. She raised 7 children in this home. What I knew was we had stability. We always had a home. It didn't matter where I wandered. I always had a place to go back to, as did my cousins, my nieces, my nephews, my siblings. And everything for us and for most Native families, it's about the home. It's about our families. And so when we approach our work in communities, it's really about that. It's about, our people, the people that we're related to, the people that we love, and the people that we care about. So these are very personal conversations, and they're very personal decisions. There's been a lot of conversation about rentals and, changing rent structures. Good luck talking to your tribes about that. Some tribes feel differently about that, and they do approach it as a business. That's not true of all tribes. We have a pretty diverse demographic that we deal with in tribal housing. We have, the gamut that you see anywhere in society. And there are people who really count on affordable rent as their survival. That's how there's not any opportunity for them to become homeowners. So when I really approached the question that Judith had put to me about equity, it's like, this is really interesting because we have all these people coming into these HUD programs, and I worked in the 37 Act program too, and I didn't think it was a really good program for tribes. I really didn't. I thought it did tribal members a disservice, and that it really set people up to stay in poverty in a sense. At least the homeownership programs seemed that way to me. So we looked at the young people that were coming into the community and coming into the rental program, and they were staying there. It's like, well, that isn't right. You can do so much better for yourself. And so that was my goal, one tribal family at a time. We've created different opportunities, and I'll let Governor Garcia speak here in a minute. I won't speak the entire 45 minutes. One was one was a program that we called Home of Your Own, and it's kind of a hybrid of different concepts I've heard here, where we looked at the working families and what was affordable for them, right? We built homes, and it's like, how are we going to make these work for these families? These are the basically working poor in other segments of society, but these were the people that were really trying to improve their situations. And so we structured a flat rent payment. You went into a rental lease for 3 years. And during that time, you have to do home buyer counseling with our staff. You have to really, it's a financial literacy program for 3 years. You learn about personal wealth. You learn about asset building. You learn about taking care of a home once you become a homeowner, and that the housing program isn't going to do those things for you. And it really sets them up for success, which is what I believe our job is, right? And then at the end of 3 years, we convey title, and it becomes a loan that the tribe carries. and it stays at a fixed rate. It's a little bit higher then because there's a small interest attached to it. But when we were looking at how to set the price on those, it's like, well, what is the average that a family can afford without exceeding 30% of their income, right? And so we approached it from that perspective, and we have 12 families who are in phase 1 and phase 2, 0 defaults. We're finishing phase 3. They'll be ready for occupancy in September. But I think the thing that was really interesting about that program is when we started looking at credit scores, because we wanted a minimum credit score, but we didn't anticipate that people would be like ready for the 184 program. Over 50% of our families had no credit at all, none. They had cars, they had lives. I'm assuming they didn't have credit cards or department store cards. There was no credit showing anywhere. And then we had some who maybe didn't have great credit. And so what we looked at was non-traditional credit and the things that matter. Maybe they don't pay their cell phone bill on time, but they've rented from us. Are they committed to keeping a roof over their head and investing in their family? And for the people that was, true of, they were our first participants. And it's been a really successful program. I think the thing that really resonates with me is the ripple effect. You're not just helping like these 12 tribal families, you're really planting that seed for their children. They're seeing what that stability is like for them and their families. And when something good is happening on the reservation, I guarantee you everybody knows about it. And so we have people knocking on our door before we even have the other homes built. So that's been really successful. So in terms of the tribe and kind of changing, shifting thinking on how do we advance these types of priorities and these types of concepts, it's an education process. Most of the tribes that have housing authorities that have been around for a while, they grew up in the 37 Act program, and that's probably what they know, what they're used to, and so it takes time. If you're a lender and you really want to do loans on tribal land, you need to anticipate that it's going to be an education process, not just with the tribal housing staff, but really with the tribal council, because at the end of the day, they make the decisions. And I think that you really have to engage directly with tribes and starting with the housing authorities. On a national level, I think there are some things too. I think the Housing Council has 3 events a year. NCAI has 3 events a year. If you don't know Jackie, is it Peta? Mm-hmm. Okay, Jackie Peta from NCAI. I call her JJP, Jackie Johnson Peta. She's a former chairwoman of the National American Indian Housing Council. She's like an old housing hand. And Tony Walters, the executive director of NEHC. Tony? He's in the back. Yep. So these are 2 people that you probably want to know if you don't know, because they have direct access to tribal leadership and tribal housing authorities. NEHC has 278 members. That means tribally designated housing entities from across the United States, Hawaii, Alaska. That's a lot of exposure. That's a lot of exposure. And I think that the workbook, so NEHC has members, NCAI has tribal leaders as members, but each region also has groups of tribal leaders that meet. In the Northwest, we have affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians. New Mexico has a different structure for the Pueblo governors, and they all meet at least quarterly. And these are really the decision makers in all of our programs. And I think that, one thing that's true about tribal leaders is they all want the best for their members. They maybe don't know quite how to get there and how to move that forward, because there are so many competing priorities that our elected officials have. But they all want to see, the absolute best for their members. And if they understand this is really investing in the future of an individual member and that entire family, in a sense, I think that's an easy sell, right?
Yeah.
People are nodding, so that's an easy sell. And so that's really where I think the conversation begins. And I'm going to stop there and pass it to Governor Garcia.
Well, thank you, number one, for having us on this panel. A lot of complicated issues that we've discussed in just a day and a half, going on 2 days. But the question having to do with how do we engage the tribal leaders, and having to do with there's a handbook, but a handbook is just as good as a strategic plan. We had a discussion about education this morning. If you have a strategic plan, but you never use it, it sits on the wall, then you never see any results. And so the handbook, we've got to have the tribal leaders make sure that they do read it. And if they have any question, that they have a go-to person that they can go ask about what does this really mean and what's all entailed in it. But an important factor for tribes is there is a relationship between the tribal government, tribal leadership, and the TDHEs, the Tribal Designated Housing Authority. And sometimes those relationships are good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes there is no relationship. And so understanding that structure is a lead into how a tribal leader can then best provide support for the housing. And so we need to understand that, and the people that work in the housing system should also understand that within your regions and within your areas or within your tribes. And so if you understand that part of it, then you find means by which you can communicate with the tribes and the tribal leaders. And so in this case, I think the handbook is going to be as good as if people read it or not. Mm-hmm. And so that's got to be one of the challenges, is to ensure that how can we demonstrate that this works. But there are also different levels of accomplishments for the housing entities within the tribes all over the country, like the housing authorities. How many did you say were members of the 200 and something? Yeah. And there are 567 tribes. Now, not every tribe has a TDHE because there are some consortium, but that's a sign, an indicator right off the bat that there's some missing tribes somewhere. And so if you look at which of those 267 members are successful, you engage them as a partner in helping to move the effort with the handbook and the approaches that we've talked about here. And so if we set out a plan to do that, that is one effort. So now the spirit of Indian country is going to grow just by that very fact, that you've engaged others that are successful, that know the process, that are really truly down to earth, doing the work at the floor level, ground level, that you can help them to support the rest of the tribes in the nation. And I think we can get a lot more done than if just one or two people are going out and trying to demonstrate to the rest of Indian country that this system works. And so it grows the same, just like setting up the roots in a tree. They're going to grow. And how fast they grow is going to be an indicator for us on how we should move forward. And it's always got to be a refined plan, that you don't go for 1 year and try this method and say, oh, man, it's not working, and 1 year has gone by. You've got to do it continuously, and that's part of what implementing a strategic plan is all about, is that you're constantly monitoring, making refinements. And so a lot of stuff in that book, but there's a lot of pieces of it that people aren't going to directly understand. It's like teaching calculus. There's a lot of pieces that are missing, and people don't understand that part, so you got to take time to come back around and do what you need to do to bring that understanding level to the right level so that you can move forward. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the ground, you're going to be spinning your wheels, and that's one thing that we can't afford to do. So we got to continue moving, but continuously monitor, and I'll do my part. I know I have great relationship with the pueblos in New Mexico and one pueblo in Texas, but I also have great relationship with other Indian nations throughout the country. So I will do my part, and I have one clue as to why am I doing housing now. You know, I'm a tech guy. I'm a technical guy, so I should be doing energy and telecommunications and other things like that, which I am doing, but somehow I got pulled into housing, and I know why and how. And that's really where I got my national start, being involved in NAHASA, the first round of negotiated rulemaking. I was governor of my pueblo, 1997, and I got pulled in, and so here I am now, working in housing issues. But that's a priority for tribes. Whether the tribe know it or not, it is a priority. Where tribal leaders know it's a priority. But where is it a priority when you've got all these other priorities? And that's the challenge for tribal leaders. And so for us to make a better impact, a good impact, a faster impact, as you're saying, better, more, better, and faster, that's how we're going to do it. By creating other partnerships, by engaging the other people that are very resourceful, and that's our tribal people, our partners, our financing people, our federal agencies, and all of those. And sometimes we spin our wheels because we don't know where to go next. And what may work in the Northwest may not work in Pueblo country. It may not work in the Eastern Band Cherokee. And so, you know, we've got to know what will work in those areas, and we can't just know just by going over there. You got to look at the historical parts of it. And I think that is a demonstration for it. You're collecting data. When you do that, you look at the data that exists for how well the housing authorities are moving. They're either going like this, or they're going like this, or they're going like this. And if you don't know that, then how do I know what to apply? You know by doing quick assessments. And the people on the ground level already have those assessments. So it's a good indicator from them when they let you know, this is what we're missing, this is what we're doing, this is what we're not doing. So then you have a better feel for how you're going to move forward. So, but that's what I envision happening in the country. It's not going to happen overnight, but it could happen within the next 6 months. Really, really move it forward. So, you know, I'll do what I can personally.
So one of the things one of the other hats I wear, I'm the second vice president for my tribe, the Clinton-Haida Tribes of Alaska. And I'll have to tell you, as a tribal leader, probably most of our public comments and issues are around housing. So tribal leaders are well informed of the issues or the concerns that our citizens have around housing, and it actually is one of our greater challenges that we constantly have. But we always deal with it. We're always dealing with it at that level. And when I think about the conversations in the last 2 days, and even a conversation we had last night about how do we engage tribal leaders and what will motivate them to actually come to the table. And, you know, I think about myself in my tribal leader role. I really want to be able to know the demographics of my communities. I really want to be able to know within those demographics, how are our housing services, how are we providing service to them, and what are the gaps, and what do we need to know. But I can also say that the challenge is being able to, I don't want to know, except for the housing side of me always wants to know. But as a tribal leader, I don't need to know the finer details. I just need to know that we have a program and a service that's going to provide these gaps. I remember when I first came to HUD, and I had left my tribe as the director of the Housing Authority, and I wasn't there but 2 weeks, and I mentioned this to folks last night, but I wasn't there but 2 weeks, and my tribal leader called me up, and he goes, "Now tell me again why we're having to make these housing payments, which were increased. They were homeownership payments, increased over the level of what people were paying before. They were still affordable. No one got a home ownership payment that wasn't affordable, but it wasn't that baseline, really, really low rental kind of payment, and it was for a home ownership. And I told my tribal leader at that moment, I said, when they ask you that question, you go back and you say to them, do they want to be able to have housing for their children and their grandchildren? And if so, then we have to pay the value. We have to pay and increase the value of the payments, else we're not going to have enough money to be able to make houses happen for the next generations. And he said, okay. And I know as a tribal leader, that's one of the challenges. And so that's why I asked the question of Bob earlier. So my question back to you guys is, from your experience, and I also wanted to announce that we said at NCAI, we committed to this project. Wanted to let you know, one of my vice presidents here, Joe Garcia, that we've committed that at our 75th annual meeting in October, the week of October 22nd, that we will have two things. We will have a plenary speaker that will speak to the tribal leaders about the importance of home ownership. And I want to do that framing it from a perspective of, as we're looking to the future, here we are at our 75th anniversary, as we're looking for the future of Indian country, what is it that we need and how do we get there? And so that's the perspective I'd like to take that from. And then I want to have a session, and we're deciding whether it's a pre-meeting or a breakout session, but I think breakout sessions work out well for tribal leaders. You get more of them there. But we will have a session around the handbook and how do we move forward home ownership. So if I, thank you. So talking to my panelists, if I'm going to encourage tribes to get engaged, what is it the message that you think is actually going to engage? What do tribal leaders need or want? Or how are they going to get themselves engaged in making sure that we have, which I do agree with what you just said. I agree that as tribal leaders, we have a vision of prosperity for our tribal citizens. So how do we make that home ownership equate to that vision? Either one? Go ahead.
Well, in this case, I relate back to the presentation that was made yesterday, and what is a home and what is a house? For people back in New Mexico, the Pueblos, it relates back to the land. And the land is a part of who we are. We're part of the land base. We're part of the land. We're part of Mother Earth. And home ownership is that relationship between Mother Earth and me. It's a relationship between my family and Mother Earth. And that's what the prayers are always saying, that you are part of Mother Earth. You must protect Mother Earth. And what better way to protect Mother Earth by having a safe, sound home for the family, and not only for the family, but for the generations to come. And so if you look at the plaza structures in the Pueblos, we just restored our plaza in New Mexico, Okeowinge. For over 300 years that the plaza stood with multi-level homes, everybody living, family next to it, the next family. And then Indian housing came along. And Indian housing destroyed that concept and that tradition. People started moving out. So the homes in the plaza stood bare, and they were falling apart. And we had the vision to say, that's our traditional land. That's our sacred land. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of who our family's going to be. We need to sell that, and we need to demonstrate that it is that important. So the importance of that life, as we know it. It's all about life. It's what demonstrated the support for the Tribal Council to move forward with finding the funding and supporting our housing authority to redevelop that property. And guess what? Those structures are put together. The houses are back up. We got the 2-story, and they're in the same form as they were 200 years ago, only built better. And so the families moved back to those homes. And so the next level, next phase of this project is to rebuild the homes where there's empty lots, where the houses completely fell apart. But the demonstration is that. It's what a house, what a home, what home ownership really means. And the tribal leaders understand that because they have it in their heart. And that's the liveliness and goodness that the tribal leaders are providing for their tribal leaders. And to reinvigorate that kind of an energy is our challenge. And we can do it because that's what the tribal leaders believe to begin with. It's just that we need a little bit of nudge here and there so that the handbook then becomes a key player, a tool for allowing them to move forward. So that's a concept that, and it's not concept, it's life. It's the way it is. It's reality.
I don't know how to add or improve upon that. That was pretty good. That was a really great answer. Engaging tribal leadership and making the handbook.
Or really, what do you think are some of the things that will really motivate a tribal leader when we're looking at, wanting to have this conversation or getting them engaged on the value of home ownership for their communities? What could be some of those messages or those pieces?
Well, looking at my experience and the people that I work with pretty much on a daily basis, I think everybody understands the importance of home, maybe not on the level that Governor Garcia just explained it. That was really very spiritual and very eloquent. But everybody understands the need to have stable housing. You have children that need to be able to have a home. It's good for their health. It's good for their education. You don't have healthy people if you don't have healthy homes, right? And I think tribal leaders understand that. And I think what they also understand is the need to invest in the future of their tribal leaders. People talk a lot about 7 generations and, what are we doing for the future? California, they say 3 behind and 3 in front are the 7 generations, but most tribes say the 7 in front. And it's like, how are you investing when you design communities and providing for the generations to come? Not everybody wants to come home and live on the reservation. What we found where we're at right now, we have an 11-county service area in the state of Oregon. So Siletz was a terminated tribe, and when they were restored, the government basically created a reservation for them in the town of Siletz, and there's, I think it's 30 or 32 different tribal affiliations and tribal bands that were basically located there. The entire state of Oregon was Indian land at one point, and that's no longer the case. So our reservation's very small, and through years and years of kind of recovering from the effects of all of that, people live in Portland. We have about 700 tribal members who live in the Portland metro area, but we don't have a reservation in Portland, and that's where their lives are. That's where their support systems are, their friends, their families, and so our challenge is trying to figure out how do we meet their needs without insisting that everybody come home to the reservation if they want affordable housing. So we've developed a multitude of programs, and I think, at least the tribal council that I work with, they're very, very open to meeting people where they're at, I think is kind of the concept. And if people live in Portland and, that's where they need to be or want to be, then we try and create opportunities for them there. And I believe tribal leadership understands that, not just meeting people where they're at, but the importance of homeownership and building wealth and providing the stability for families. I think messaging matters here.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And, I'll have to say, all my years of working with tribes, I always look at it like this. Tribes are like the president of the United States. I'm not going to go to them with minute details, but I'm going to be able to make sure that I have a surefire concept and that I'm going to be able to have the data and the other information to support it. I mean, we got a wealth of data here the last 2 days, and certainly some of those, those slides that actually showed some of the disparities of home ownership and American Indians and Alaska Natives, participation rates and other kinds of things should be inspirational itself. But also being able to see the best practices. If you look in the handbook, those little case studies in the handbook are amazing and to be able to know that there's more detail behind them, that to be able to see what are some examples of things that are happening. Tribes, that's why work in regions with tribes works well, because they have a more intimate relationship with the tribes that are closer to them. They see the peer-to-peer kind of relationships. I also say it kind of creates a little bit of competition. If something is looking well and working well, then, their neighbors hear about it, their tribal citizens hear about it, and they also want it to happen in their community. And that's why some of the works around the coalitions work so well. But, when I think about talking to a tribal leader, I always look at things also too through a business plan. You have to have the information and the data there. You have to be able to put together the financial analysis and what it will really take to get there. For me as a tribal leader, even as running NCAI, a nonprofit, I have to run it as it's a business. And I have to be able to make sure that the decisions I make are business decisions. And I think that we can make home ownership actually be a successful, not just for the future generations of Indian country, but it is a successful business venture that actually will bring sustainability to the housing products and services that are offered to our tribal communities. And this is a piece of the pie that we really just have to figure out how to make it work and to share it. And I know that we can't do it without all of you that are in the room. We need all the experts to be designed and to develop all of those products with a little tweak here for a different tribe, cultural balance for somebody else. But, those are the products and services that we need to share with each other. So thank you for allowing us to be part of your panel here today.